We are back with the live classroom on chapter number 5, verse number 22 this time. As the shlok goes, Yehi sansparshajaha bhogaha dukkha yonayah evate adyantavantah kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. The pleasures that arise through the contact of sensory organs, they lead to dukkha, pain and suffering. For they have a beginning and an end. Therefore, Arjuna, the wise ones, the far-sighted ones, do not entangle into such pleasures. They do not indulge into such pleasures. It says that the sensory pleasures, the pleasures that we draw by the usage or deployment of the sensory organs, they lead to pain and suffering. For they have a beginning and an end. A beginning may be a moment of joy, but the moment anything ends, it's over. You're back to the square one. It's again pain and suffering. So joy and suffering both are two ends of the sense pleasures, the pleasures that we draw from the senses. This verse has got an esoteric meaning as well. And that esoteric meaning deflects me directly from this inference to another aspect of the yogic science. According to the yogic science, the science of the yogas established and observed by great masters in the times unknown, human existence is divided into 5 subtle sheaths, 5 subtle existence, 5 subtle layers that we term in Sanskrit as Annamay, Pranamay, Manomay, Vijnanamay, Anandamay. Not to get immersed into or entangled into much into the terminology, I come down to only one aspect, and that is that we have an energy body which is called as prana. I'm talking about an esoteric meaning drawn from the same verse. Why the pleasures drawn by the deployment of senses lead to pain and suffering? The human body has a subtle existence which is the energy circuitry, the pranic body of a human. In the pranic body, the biocurrents of around 10 kinds of prana, they have their own circuitry. Within them the entire current flows. If you are in a lot of courage, if you are experiencing a lot of joy, if you are experiencing a lot of enthusiasm, experiencing a lot of enchantment, experiencing dissuasion, experiencing depression, all these have a direct relation with the pranic or the energy body within a human. The energy determines the kind and the level. The kind and the level of exuberance or dissuasion. You are going to be exuberant to what extent, whether high or low, or whether you are going to be under depression, high or low. That's the kind and level, would certainly depend upon your energy circuitry within your own body. This is one aspect. Second aspect is any and every pleasure that we draw is by an expenditure of prana, that is energy. No pleasure can be drawn without expenditure of energy. If you want to give your eyes an experience, energy is required. If you want your nose to gather an experience, energy is required. If you want to speak something, go on speaking, communicate, energy is required. If you want to taste something, energy is required. If you want to listen something, energy is required. If you want to move somewhere or touch and feel, energy is required. Not only that, even for processing of all information that you feed through your senses to your brain, to process that information and give it a conclusive end, energy is required. So energy is the primal source of fuel to propel any and every activity that we transpire through our senses, or the feedback of the senses is further processed within our brain. Energy is mandatory. And what kind of energy we have, what level of energy we have, matters. In general parlance, whatever experience or whatever pleasure that we draw by the deployment of the sensory organs, it creates its own kind of impact on our energy system. For example, if you indulge into a very meaningless pleasure of anything, whether it could be overeating, or it could be even something which is more into pornography, etc., well, we have to term it. What happens is, if you go on observing pornography, the impact that you give your brain is a contaminated impressions that distort and confuse your energy circuitry. So what happens is, not only that when you use your senses into meaningless, demeaning purposes, the level of your energy depletes, it goes down. It goes down. Not only that, at the same time, it gets contaminated. For example, if a circuit wires haphazardly spread, interacting, touching each other without insulation, are more vulnerable to short circuit. So you are going to have breakdowns every moment. However, energy flow you may try and attempt to pass through them, short circuits cannot be avoided, breakdowns cannot be avoided. So that is the contamination of the energy circuitry in a human. So two things have to be remembered that we draw as an esoteric inference from this verse. When we deploy our senses for demeaning purposes, we not only contaminate our energy circuitry, at the same time we deplete our reservoir, our creative resource of energy. Why is it so? Why are we talking? Senses are meant for such purposes. All our body organs are meant for such purposes. Why should there be a restriction? What is the need for that? Why should there be a principle, a guideline, or a sermon to be passed on? Don't use your senses, don't use your sensory organs for demeaning and meaningless purposes. Don't drain them out. What are they ultimately meant for? If the eyes have to be restricted, what are they meant for? If the ears, if the tongue and other organs have to be restricted, constrained, what are they meant for? Yeah, the question is very apt and very legitimate one. If do's and don'ts have to be prescribed, then what are all these meant for? See, you have to understand something very important. In a human existence, any and every experience is through our human brain. Whatever you experience in the matter of awareness, experience, feelings, imagination, thoughts, memories, instincts, impulses, it's all in the brain, human brain. Now, if in the human brain you have a stock of contaminated energy circuitry with levels that are depleting, obviously you are not going to experience even the material resources sought by the deployment of sensory pleasures to the optimum levels. Apart from that, something very important that must be made a mention here. We all know that in the human body, we talk about something like a Kundalini power, which has got chakras. We have got chakras over here, we have got chakras over here, and then we have chakras over here, and this itself is a major source of enlightenment. Energy rises from bottom to top. It rises from bottom to top. The serpentine power goes over here and we experience enlightenment. Now, what are we talking about Kundalini? Am I going to teach you about Kundalini? No, I'm not going to teach you about Kundalini. I'm only trying to understand, make you and make myself understand, why do we have restrictions and constraints that have been time and again professed and established by our great masters upon non-deployment of sensory organs for meaningful purposes that otherwise contaminate the energy circuitry and deplete its reservoir. The reason for that is human brain has been created by the system of Almighty in such a manner, it has a tremendous potential lying in a dormant state. Tremendous potential. The amount of usage of a human brain that we generally do in our common lives for transacting all business, better be relationship, better be moving around, entertainment, understanding subjects or whatever. We are only able to use a decimated proportion of our brain potential. Whereas if a pure reservoir of energy, pure energy means something which is beyond contamination. If a reservoir of pure energy is created and channelized within the human body, it awakens and propels the otherwise subtle dormant motors. I will call them as motors. They are subtle dormant motors. The moment they are propelled with the reservoir of pure energy, they start producing a momentum that leads to certain paranormal abilities within the same limited, constrained human brain. The same human brain which is otherwise utilized merely to notice, that is to observe, to feed the human brain with some inputs of information, store them, process them, elucidate, relate and then reproduce. The same ordinary human brain becomes the playground for such paranormal abilities that exceed the levels of common comprehension or common understanding. Not only that it will only give you some understanding or some experience when you become enlightened or when you have experienced a Jagrit Kundalini, an awakened Kundalini. Short of that, even if you have not reached this culmination, before reaching this culmination even, if pure reservoir of energy starts moving within the human system, new understanding opens up. New understanding in the light of the subjects you experience, the people you come across, the situations that you confront, you start gathering very different understanding. You try to absorb more and more which was otherwise not into your comprehension, not into your notices. It was quite elusive. It was rather under a veil of ignorance which you never could understand before. Why does it happen? It happens because the human brain is programmed. It is constituted in such a manner that unless it is fed with a reservoir of pure energy, it does not give way for new usherings to happen in the parlance or dimension of awareness. And the major enemy that restricts or abstains the brain to function for the potential that it has been actually designed for are the sansparsha bhoga dukkha yonya evate, the deployment of sensory organs for demeaning and meaningless pursuits. And demeaning and meaningless pursuits are the pleasures that take you overboard, that are the source of pain and suffering. They have a beginning and an end. They may have a beginning and an end, but they deplete you with a lot of creative stock of energy and also contaminate with whatever reservoir of energy that you have in store. It's therefore that the great master has made a very specific mention for all those great seekers that want to explore the immense potential which is there in the human existence, and especially in the terms of the brain potential, to try and ensure that you have a pure energy which is not contaminated, flowing through your body, through your existence, and with an adequate reservoir, so that you allow the most organic motor organs, subtle motor organs within your own body to become activated, function, and unleash before you a dimension of understanding which otherwise shall always remain under a veil, under a spell of ignorance. That is why here this particular verse gives more meaning and more emphasis upon that. Apart from that, one aspect is another very important, and that is, when you are constrained at the end of your understanding, you shall not be able to afford absolute justice in the form of conclusions that you draw as decisions towards several aspects in your life, because you will always be constrained in the terms of having limited knowledge. You will always be constrained to have limited understanding. And the moment you have a broader understanding, you gather access to more and more of observance within yourself. You shall be able to factor it within your decisions, within your conclusions, and do more justice with situations and schemes ahead in your life. So this goes with this particular verse. There is not much to say about it except the esoteric interpretation that we draw. You will have to revisit this video once again to gather the inference that I have drawn in the light of the energy circuitry and the pleasures that we draw through the deployment of senses, leading to unmeaningful and demeaning sources. This does not mean that we draw a very harsh line for non-usage of our sensory organs. No, it is not so. It is being professed, it is being conveyed, it is being just negotiated to use and deploy sensory organs for the rightful purposes, so that they don't get contaminated, and for a purpose which it is meant for, to the extent, not to go beyond an extent. And that wisdom one has to develop within one's own self. To what extent should one's own senses be deployed for the transaction with the world outside in order to justice with the world inside? That goes for the verse number 22, chapter 5. Be with us. Next verse. This live classroom is commenced every second and last Sunday of every month. So be with us, 9:30 a.m. every second and last Sunday with the next verse. Till then, Om Shanti, 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 Om.